Yeah, so I mean, I'm a filmmaker. I've been making films for about 15 years. The way the film kind of came to be was it was sort of born out of loss. So
Today's guest is Stephen Gray. Stephen Gray is a multidisciplinary filmmaker.
Mary describes there was sort of this pathway towards heaven when she was out of her body, and she said this pathway, based on the size, was full of flowers that were like thousands and thousands of flowers in colors that she's never seen before. And so, I don't know, it just piqued my interest as well. There's just something so interesting about that.
And his latest documentary, After Death, released in theaters October 27th.
So for the people that are very skeptical and would say that I think these people are just making it up for money or fame or some ulterior motive, some of these people, like I'll give you some examples, like Dr. Mary Neal, who's in the film, and she died in a kayak accident. She was without oxygen for about 28 to 30 minutes, and she was submerged underwater. I think it was like 24 minutes or something around there. And so it was quite some time without oxygen. And as a doctor, she would say it's basically impossible the way she came back.
So now for my conversation with Stephen Gray.
If you want to learn how I went from being a skeptical atheist who thought there was zero chance of an afterlife to a skeptical atheist who thinks an afterlife is highly probable, come check out my books. WTF Just Happened.
I am talking today with Stephen Gray, and he produced the amazing movie After Death. So welcome, Stephen. Tell us a little about yourself and your role with the movie.
Sure. Well, thanks so much for having me here. I appreciate the time to talk with you and share more about the film and everything. So I mean, I'm a filmmaker. I've been making films for about 15 years. Most of my work before After Death, it was in the commercial space. So a lot of shorter form stuff. I think the longest thing I had created was like 10 minutes before After Death. So, and then it was a big jump for me to make a feature film, but we can kind of get into, how that kind of came to be as well.
This was your first feature film too.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Good for you. So, that's exciting.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I wasn't sure if I really, intended to always like do feature films. I mean, I probably deep down inside that would be like, desire, but I wasn't sure that would actually be something that would come to fruition. But the way the film kind of came to be, was sort of born out of loss. So, and that's what got me interested in near-death experiences in general. So, basically backing up to 2012, my brother-in-law, who I'm very close with, it's my wife's only sibling. He was 36 years old and he was killed in a car wreck. And so for me in my life at that time, it kind of really kind of derailed everything, like both the family dynamic, my personal sort of idea of if there's something after or not. I wasn't sure really at that point because it became so real. Like I needed to know, where is he? It just seemed like kind of this chaotic situation of, that he's here one moment, gone the next. There was no goodbyes, there's no answers. And so that's what kind of got me exploring the topic of near-death experiences. We had people around us that were, suggesting that we read these books. So a lot of people were kind of suggesting different books for us to read. And it was my mother-in-law that got into it initially. She loves just reading anything and all things, and books, she can get through like a couple books in a day. It takes me a little bit longer. So I was hesitant at first when I heard the stories of near-death experiences, I think because I was kind of guarding myself and, going through grief and all that. I just didn't want to hear something that was just like, going to make me feel better temporarily or anything like that. So I wasn't sure if I really believed in these stories initially, but I actually came across an audio interview with a doctor who, he had fallen, I think it was 2 stories out of a building and basically like cracked his head open on a sidewalk. And as a physician, he's talking about what happens in the body and all the work that he had done as a doctor and everything he understands about the body. And then he's saying, now I'm outside of what's clearly my body down there. and I'm up here, and this is what the form is like. And then he's describing it, and it's just like, I was so taken aback because he's so sincere in the way he's describing it. He's a doctor, and I'm like, what on earth is a doctor doing talking about this? So I think that's what kind of like hooked me initially, that there must be something more to this. And then I started, reading these stories of people who've had these near-death experiences. And I think it was something like after 30 books, I was really surprised by, all of these different stories, very different backgrounds, very different people. They didn't seem to know each other, and they're having these profound experiences, a lot of which overlapped. From what I was reading, there was a lot of commonalities between these stories in their experience. And I found that really interesting and compelling. And when I started to kind of dream of what this could look like in a documentary form, because for me, that's the media that I create. That's the type of media that I typically like to consume, is in film. So when I started to kind of put that together, that's when all of a sudden there's this author, John Burke. He dropped this book called Imagine Heaven. And I actually saw, there was an interview with him, and he was doing a press release, I think, or press tour on the release of the book. And I saw him on television, and everything he's describing in that book is exactly what I was like envisioning what would work for a documentary. So he wrote this book called Imagine Heaven, which basically combined 100 near-death experiences from very different backgrounds, very different sort of situations of how they died. And he's threading together like these commonalities between them. And I had never seen anything quite like it. I mean, there's all kinds of different books out there that kind of combine multiple stories, but they're sort of just like, they're just sort of, here's one story, here's the next. And it doesn't really cleanly thread how this connects. And I felt like John did a really good job with that. So I reached out to him, and I just assumed he was probably already creating a film, and he wasn't at the time. I just personally wanted to watch a film like what was created in that book. And I wasn't finding anything out there like that. So then I just was like, I guess I'll put my skill set together, and maybe I can go and create it. So I was pretty naive to the creation of a documentary initially. Just it's a massive undertaking to make a feature, and all my experience so far was just in the commercial space. So I guess I was excited and naive, and it just took a lot longer than expected. I think this was about 7 years from the idea to the release of the film. Yeah, so it's quite a long journey, and we were 3 years in production on the feature length film. But that's kind of how it came to be, and why I created it, because I was asking those questions: what happens after death?
Yeah, my interest in all of this came about due to a loss too. My dad passed in 2015, and before your loss and you started on these endeavors, is this something you could have ever envisioned yourself doing? I mean, if someone had told me I was doing this, there's just no way. I thought this was as realistic as the Tooth Fairy. Is this something that would, like, you pre-2012 would look back on and be shocked you were doing?
Yeah, I think I'm very shocked that I made a film, and that not only did I make a film and that it released to as many theaters as it had gone out to. Probably more shocked about that, but and I wouldn't have created a film about near-death experiences, because prior to the loss, I didn't. It wasn't so serious for me. I didn't need to investigate that personally. And it was through loss and grief that I realized, there's so many people out there that are going through grief and loss, just like me, and are asking those difficult questions. I guess my eyes were open to that, that this is something that really affects everyone. But I did grow up in a church, so I did grow up in a faith that kind of taught me to believe that there is life after death. And so from a young age, I was raised to believe that that life does go on, that there is a heaven, there's a God. And I did hold on to that faith and did have that belief. In 2012, it was really it was a hard time. It really kind of basically was shaking my faith to the core. So and I kind of lost it for a short while, because when I was asking those difficult questions, it's like I just wanted to know, was it just wishful thinking, these stories that are there in the Bible, or is this real? And I wasn't getting like for me, I didn't get like the honest answers that I was that I was asking. I just didn't feel like I was getting anything that was really, felt real. I don't know. So as I'm pondering that and asking these questions, I just thought, like, if these people truly are dying and some of them are claiming that they're dead for over 90 minutes, that's a pretty bold statement. And I just knew as a filmmaker, that's going to be pretty easily to kind of, it's going to be pretty easy to show that this either really did happen or it's, made up. I mean, these are bold claims. The way that these people describe that they died, a lot of them, if they're outside of the hospital room, are usually, like, say in an accident or something like that. And typically there's going to be like eyewitnesses to the account. And a lot of the stories that we included in the film, that was kind of one of the filters that we had to go after and seek the stories that we included in the film was, is there evidence to go along with their story? And because we kind of wanted to approach it from a skeptical perspective, not assuming that, the audience really believes this. And as I was asking those questions, unsure about my faith, kind of wanted to stay in that mindset in the creation of the film, even though through the stories and these books and getting to know these people, I became completely convinced. It was like, oh, this is real. Like there's just no question anymore. But I couldn't just go and make the film, as a convinced person, because through that lens, because, not everyone has been this far along the journey, right? I've read all of these different books and met so many different people and became convinced along the way, but I wanted to kind of like, bring them on that journey through after death. So that was one filter we had was, is there evidence to go along with their story? And that sometimes just is just like the nature of how they died. Not everyone has that. And sometimes where it happened to, like in different countries, developing nations, I mean, there's just not the same kind of medical transcripts and documentation around this kind of stuff. So those were some filters that we had. And then the other one was, out of the people that we selected for after death, was a lot of the people that we included actually had something to lose in telling their story. So for the people that are very skeptical and would say that I think these people are just making it up for money or fame or some ulterior motive, some of these people, like I'll give you some examples, like Dr. Mary Neal, who's in the film, she wrote this book, To Heaven and Back, and she died in a kayak accident. She was without oxygen for about 28 to 30 minutes, and she was submerged underwater. I think it was like 24 minutes or something around there. And so it was quite some time without oxygen. And as a doctor, she would say it's basically impossible the way she came back. Like, it's beyond the point of resuscitation. They were just doing a body recovery at that point when they were trying to find her downriver. And but she's a spine surgeon. She has her own practice in Wyoming. She doesn't need to write a book. And on top of not needing, like, in terms of like financial gain of a book, of which there isn't a lot, as it turns out, she also is a very private person. She's an introvert in terms of her personality, and she's quite happy with her family in this kind of little place in Wyoming, and she doesn't want to be known by the whole world. Everything kind of in her, in terms of her natural personality and everything, is just telling her like she doesn't want to be known. So there's all these reasons to not share her story. On top of that, being a doctor, all her colleagues and stuff, like, what are they going to think of what, when she's describing, being outside her body and then re-entering it after she's being told it's not her time? These kind of things aren't talked about typically amongst doctors and sometimes among nurses, but typically not amongst doctors. So there's a lot to lose in telling her story. Howard Storm, who we also have in the film, I mean, his life kind of ended up in shambles for a period of time. His kids had left him, his wife had left him, and it didn't all work out for him in his life in terms of the family relationships and all that. There was a lot to lose in coming forward and telling his story, and yet he still kept to it because, like, this is so real to him. This is more real than this life that we have here. And so there was something compelling about that. And that was just kind of a pattern that we saw with a lot of people that we included in the film after death. So those are two kind of filters that we had in the people we selected.
Yeah, and those are good filters, because that is the main thing skeptics often say is people want the attention, people want the money. And it's true, you don't get that much money off of these kinds of books. And yeah, I mean, that I hadn't thought of that as the common filter, though, among the people in your documentary, but that makes sense now. Then you say it when I think about their lives or what they said during it. Now, you said you ended up convinced after doing this. Did you have a turning point in the middle where you went in? I know in the beginning you were raised religious, so you thought an
Yeah.
afterlife was probable, possible, but
Mm-hmm.
then you became convinced. What was the turning point or tipping point?
I think it was just the amount of stories. Dr. Jeffrey Long has this research foundation, the NDERF, and he wrote the book. I think it was Evidence for the Afterlife, and which was a New York Times best-selling book. In his book, it's like there's 4,000 recorded accounts of near-death experiences across the globe. I mean, this includes in countries that are far-reaching, very non-Western, and the data points that he was collecting in this survey, he was kind of like taking a look at the data points and what are the commonalities and what are not. And there was more overlapping commonalities than there were not. And there was the data points that were overlapping were things like purpose, meeting God, being sent back for a reason, like their time wasn't done. You know, in After Death, we sort of have like this section we call sort of the common core near-death experience. And Dr. Jeffrey Long is in that. And he kind of highlights what do typically people experience. It's not everyone experiences all these things, but typically this is like the near-death experience, as it were. And so somebody dies, and then basically at the point when they clinically flatline, they leave their body, and then they're brought upwards. They'll sometimes meet deceased relatives initially. They'll see angels. Sometimes they're brought up towards heaven, and they meet this man of light. That's like unconditional love, and they say it's like this light is palpable. The light description is like it's not like a light bulb like that I have in the room here. It's a living light that's full of love and full of life, and which we don't experience here. There's other kind of experiences that people sort of senses that people have. They'll say sometimes it's like upwards of 50 senses that they experience, and some of the senses are experienced differently than they would be here. For example, music. Many of the people describe going to this heavenly place, and there's music. There's thousands of songs being played at the same time, and somehow it's not chaotic. It's perfectly like as if it has a natural order, and it's all meant to go together. And then the music permeates you, and you become sort of like part of the music, and you're almost like this tuning fork in this place. And then the nature around is also it also has music coming from it, and there's light sort of bound or permeating through all of the nature, like including the grass and the trees and all that. And it was just kind of like one person describes that, and then another person describes that, and then again, you have 2,000 to 4,000 people describing that same thing after they've clinically died. I just was like, it's hard to ignore that. I mean, I became convinced because it was like at this point that many people saying that, you can't say conspiracy, and you can't say. I mean, you can do you can do whatever you want about the individual personal accounts and stories. Like you could just be like, well, I don't believe it, and the person's making up. You can do whatever you want to discredit individual stories if you're really dead set on kind of saying that this is not true. But that many different people who don't know each other, there's no way of knowing each other, all kind of describing something so similar, was just like, it's hard to ignore. So I became kind of convinced because of that. And there was also, more anecdotally, a few cases that stood out that are, I would say, really difficult to argue an alternate explanation for near-death experiences. So one of the cases that we have in the film we highlight is Pam Reynolds. And it is a case that's been talked about before in near-death experience books, and I think other documentaries have highlighted as well. We set out to, for us, it was like, it's not worth creating something that's just the same as anything else. It was like, well, it already exists there. It's not worth, just doing it again. So, but we did include Pam Reynolds because we ended up connecting with some of the doctors that were actually present and doing the surgery. So Dr. Carl Green's in the film, and he was a present neurosurgeon that was learning under Dr. Robert Spetzler, who was performing the surgery, and which we also have sort of archival footage of in the film. And Pam Reynolds' case is like, it has all of the ingredients to be like this lab test, essentially. I think Dr. Michael Sabum in the film, he's a cardiologist. He says, like, if you're looking for a science experiment to like prove if near-death experiences are real, this is it. And then he just outlines essentially all that happened. But the biggest points of her surgery was that she has no blood in her brain. So no blood in her head. I think it's from the neck down. There's no blood. It's been drained completely out. So physiologically, the brain is not able to even carry oxygen. Never mind, the blood, which obviously it needs to function, right? And then on top of that, they have these clicks in your ears, which are measuring brain activity. And it's basically like a very loud click from one to the other, a sensor in the other, that would create near permanent hearing loss and hearing damage if she was conscious and hearing this. But it was only after she was offline that they start the clicks. And they're monitoring her brain activity during the entire surgery. The reason why they have to do that is because they're opening up her head. It's brain surgery. It's very dangerous, obviously, if she's conscious. So she's completely out. She's flatline. And they also stop her heart during this process. So they have her artificially breathing on a machine. There's no blood in her head at all. And this is when she has this out-of-body experience. This is when she has this profound near-death experience, which included the out-of-body element. Her first memory was like being over the shoulder of the surgeon, seeing her body on the operating table, recognizing that's her body. And then, for some people it might be like, okay, well, that's just the brain producing some external vision or whatever, just thinking of what they might look like or something, producing it somehow. But again, you have to remember there's no blood in the brain at this point. And if there's an argument of like, well, if that's not when she had the near-death experience, she would have had this vision of herself being out of the body maybe later or earlier. It's not the case, because right when the things that she describes in her out-of-body state are the things that took place in terms of time when she was clinically offline. So they took the tools out, the bone saw, to begin opening up her head. That would have only happened after she's out and the blood stream from her head. And she describes all of that in detail. She describes that there's a song playing in the operating theater. It was, I think, Hotel California. She thought it was really indecent that they're playing this song. She's like, I don't want to be stuck here forever. There was some conversations and arguments that took place. They had some complications, including a cannulated artery from one leg. So they had to make a switch to the other. She recalls that in perfect detail. And she's only recalling this the next day when she wakes up. And she's saying it to Dr. Carl Green, who we have in the film. And he was the first person to talk to her after her post-op care after she came to. So she's talking about all this stuff and relaying all the information that happened during the operating room. I mean, there's nothing. So the first thing these neurosurgeons are going to think about is, oh my goodness, like, we have medical malpractice here. She was obviously she was obviously aware during the surgery. That must mean that the brain activity there was some spike, or that we weren't looking at it carefully enough. And so they went back and looked at it, and it's still flatlined. So physiologically, there's just no explanation for her being outside her body, being privy to seeing and hearing and experiencing these things that were corroborated by two neurosurgeons that were present during the surgery. So there's that case that is kind of like, to me, and you can't say anything's bulletproof, but I would say that's like the closest you get. And then the other one is people that are blind from birth. So there was a study that was done. I think it was altogether, there was in this study on blind near-death experiences, there was 14 people that were blind from birth. And there was one or two that we talk about loosely in the film for kind of a short segment, but Vicky is this one blind lady who talks about having this visual perception, basically. So in her near-death experience, she has vision, and it's not just like the vision like we have here, where you see roughly about a 50 mil lens on through your eye vision looking forward, and you have a peripheral vision along the sides, but it's usually a little blurry. And she's seeing like a 360-degree vision essentially, which is common to what people describe in near-death experience. And she's talking in visual detail of things that she saw on the accident scene. And she's describing, oh, this must be me because of the ring that I have on my finger here, the length of my hair. This is has to be me. Why am I looking at this? And she's later told it's not her time. She has the whole near-death experience, and she's brought back. But when she's talking about things in visual detail, and yet she's still blind when she comes back, it's really difficult to come up with an alternate explanation for that, right?
And that was Dr. Kenneth Ring who conducted that study, right? If
That's
people
right.
want to look
Yes.
it up.
Yeah.
The thing that always gets me baffled about his, I know he addressed it some in the book. How do they know? And if you remember any other details about this, how do people know that they're seeing when they're blind? How would they even know that sight?
Well, they don't initially. I think in his study in particular, he highlights how it's usually very disturbing. The experience or perception that they have initially is disturbing because they don't know what that is. It's really alarming. And they don't come back saying, I saw and it's like I felt like I had eyes. They don't, because they don't know what seeing is, right? People who are born blind, they don't know what vision is. They don't know what seeing is. They don't know what they're missing in terms of what a sense would be. They can't even there's no visualization of what vision could be. And something I didn't know about people that are born blind, they typically will not have visual dreams. So when they dream, it's usually like audible or it's other senses, feel and sort of audible dreams, but they don't have visual dreams. And they also, it's kind of usually common knowledge, but they wouldn't know what color is. They don't know what they can't kind of visualize what something would be like even when they're feeling. If they were born blind, they also don't know what light is and they don't know what darkness is. So it's not like they are in a dark room and their eyes are closed or something like that. There's no vision, and the brain has no idea of what vision could be.
Yeah, I find that one of the most interesting. And also, from what I understand, there are a few people who were able to verify it because they were not born blind, and then they knew they were seeing because they described it. And I would love the idea of being able to see 360 degrees. I'm like, that sounds amazing. And then people apparently see colors on the spectrum that we've never seen here.
Exactly. Yeah, that's very common. Yeah, they're seeing like this. Yeah, exactly. Like you said, a spectrum. And I think like as we get more and more advanced, camera technology and stuff like that, we're seeing infrared and different kind of light that does exist and has always existed here, but we've never perceived it. But we have tools now that can see certain spectrum. And it makes me think of maybe this is them seeing all of that data and information kind of all together, that maybe there's some layers to it that we still can't perceive and see even with tools. But yeah, they're seeing all that. And Mary describes there was sort of this pathway towards heaven when she was out of her body, and she said this pathway basically on the sides was full of flowers that were like thousands and thousands of flowers in colors that she's never seen before. And she said it was just this beauty of flowers that she's not seen anywhere on earth before. So I don't know, it just piqued my interest as well. There's just something so interesting about that.
I know. I find that so interesting because if you try to even imagine a color you've never seen, I mean, you can't. It's absolutely
No,
unimaginable. And I know
exactly.
near-death experiencers will also say trying to explain the reality of their near-death experience would be like trying to explain a color you've never seen or having sight to a blind person. You just can't. And
Yeah.
I actually just want to back up and ask you, because in the beginning, you said your mother-in-law gave you a set of books and that started to open your mind. Were there any that stood out to you that you were like, wait, this is crazy?
I think it's probably just more like, the first couple that I had come across because it's so new, and I never heard of this before. So I want to say probably the first one I read was 90 Minutes in Heaven, which was Don Piper's story, which we also included in the film After Death. And I think in particular because, he died in a car wreck, in a it's a different situation, but similar in how my brother-in-law died. And so I couldn't help but think about, is this what my brother-in-law experienced? Is this what his next, conscious kind of memory was essentially, or experience was. So that kind of left a big impact on me, I would say. And the next one that I think left a really big impact was Captain Dale Black's story. So there was a bunch of books that I read in between that, but I think his was the next big impact because there's something so interesting about him because he's an engineer. He kind of wrote from that perspective, very analytical, very straightforward. Just like, here's the details. This is what happened, and there's no. It's not like beautifully poetic and it is well written, but it was just interesting perspective that this guy, probably similar to what I was thinking about with the Dr. Richard Eby, who was this doctor who I had first heard that audio interview. There was something so different about his story, because Dale Black, because he died in a plane crash, and he's, as a pilot, he's like an engineer. He's like, here's the things I know about the the world and how things function, and it's like science and physics, and this all makes sense. What I'm experiencing no longer makes sense. Like, all of this, even though there's physicality to it, is now so foreign and so beyond kind of what I can describe. I found something so interesting about that. He also ended up being the first story that I told. I went out and created a short sort of proof of concept called Discovering Heaven. And it was Captain Dale Black's story in 2017, before I thought that a feature film was even possible. Created as sort of like this standalone short film, and I think, again, because of the book and meeting Dale and his family, and just in real life seeing something. So there's something so different about him. He was the first person I met in real life. I had many calls on Skype before that, but it was Dale was the first person I got to hang out with for a while. And I think it was like maybe the second last day before we wrapped his shoot, his daughter is she's talking to my wife and I, and she's saying, I always knew there's something different about my dad. He didn't actually share his near-death experience until basically shortly before we had created that short. He came out with the book Flight to Heaven, and it ended up being about 50 years he hadn't told this story of a near-death experience. And the reason why is because he felt that it was sacred. He felt that it was for him, and he actually felt pretty strongly that to not tell it or to hold on to it, and that he felt just deep down that there was going to be a time, and that he would know what that time is to tell his story. And so all of a sudden, I think it was like, whatever it was, I can't remember the year, say 2014 or 2015, it was the time that he felt this is one to tell it. And so he just sat his family down and was like, look, this has happened to me when I was 19 years old. And I had this profound near-death experience, and I was ushered up and towards heaven. And this is what I saw, and this is what I heard, and this is what I was told. And it wasn't my time, and I need to come back. Now, his daughter says, like, it's like, it made perfect sense. It just clicked. It was like, oh, okay, that's why my dad is so different. Because she's like, we could have had a good life. She's like, he's been really good at business. He knows how to, like, at one point in his career, he ran a whole airline. Essentially, he had a whole fleet of airplanes, and he just knows how to do that, to build and grow and how airplanes function, all that kind of stuff. And so at one point he had done that, and then he felt that, oh, we're not supposed to have this, and just basically kind of dismantled and sold off, and then gave a whole big chunk of it away to people in need. And she was just like, what are you doing? Like, we could have had a good life, Dad, right? But it was like, right. This made sense now to her, because she's like, he's marked so differently than anyone else she's met. And she's like, yeah, of course he's seen heaven. Of course he had this whole experience and was given a different purpose in life, essentially. It's just that made sense to her.
Hey, everyone. I'm really excited to let you know about the science and spirituality salons I'm now hosting. During these intimate events, a scientifically verified psychic medium will give all of you readings, and I will give a talk on the science and evidence that changed my mind about an afterlife. This will also be an amazing opportunity to get to meet some of you in person or virtually, and to share more about all the science and data that transformed my worldview and got me through my worst days. These can be hosted in your home, in a nearby cafe with a private room, or they can even be virtual.
I've hosted a few already, and they were really special, fascinating, emotional, evidential. So if you're interested in getting a small group together over dinner, brunch, drinks, coffee, to learn more about the science and to get evidential medium readings, send me an email at hello@wtfjusthappened.net and put science and spirituality in the
And there was
title.
just something so interesting about kind of hearing that perspective from the family as well.
Like a life just based so much on love for others. And, I mean, obviously that's something more powerful than just someone making up a story. I mean, that's to me, I don't use the
Yeah,
word proof because I don't think we have proof, but that to me is evidence that he made those choices. I mean, that's a pretty
definitely.
drastic choice to make if you're just making up a story, to back it
Yeah,
up,
like
give away millions of dollars. And,
I know it's like, why would you do that? Right? It doesn't,
right.
like, from this world's perspective, it doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't. I mean, not giving away and helping, but not to the extent it sounds like he did. I mean, it's wonderful. We'd
Yeah.
have a very, very different world if everybody wanted to live that way. But
Yeah.
I can't say I'm that generous yet. I want to give and help, but I probably wouldn't to the point where I would transform my life to that extent. I don't
Yeah.
think I would. Yeah. So you said you believed in, use the words God and heaven, the more religious based words. Did you have a vision of what that would be like? And how do you see it differently now? Or do NDEs back up how you pictured it would be? Or is it a completely different vision?
That's a hard one to answer because it's sort of like yes and no. And so I would say all preconceived notions of what the afterlife is and even what heaven is, who God is, how that works, I think is like just totally different in a good way now from these near death experiences. And I think the big thing is I guess I didn't feel like I put God or heaven or what the afterlife would be in a box before. I didn't feel like I had done that. And yet, after with near death experiences, it's just like, oh, clearly I did. Like, because I'm trying to picture and like make sense of it, we will never be able to like humanly comprehend how big God is. We just can't. Like, it's just not possible. Kind of similar to like when people in near death experiences describe, they don't have words to describe what they saw, and they're like, well, I'll try. And they're like, yeah, you will try because we're making a feature film about this. um but they all say words don't do it justice. And yeah, I think it's just a lot bigger and more inconceivable, I guess, than initially what I had imagined or pictured it. And when we created sort of the visuals for the film After Death, it was very intimidating to create something that when people are saying, hey, I don't have words that can even possibly do it justice. There's no language on earth from any human spoken language that would ever possibly do it justice. But, here we go. I'll try and describe it. And then I'm like, on top of that, not going to be able to create something that's going to do it justice to their words that already don't do it justice. And we're making an independent feature documentary. So there's, limited resources. So the idea for how we're going to visually portray what they describe was always going to be what are elements that we can perceive that do kind of like instill wonder in humans. And I think so a couple of them that kind of came to mind were, well, first of all, nature. I mean, the world there's so many different countries, so many different landscapes. We're filled with like beautiful, awe-inspiring wonders of nature around here, and many people describe this otherworldly nature in this sort of heavenly place that they come into. And there's otherworldly elements to it, but it is kind of grounded in nature that's similar to what they would see here on Earth. It's just bigger scale, and there's more to it. So we tried to like base it off of that, but also every night when you look up, after the sun is set, there's stars that appear in the night sky. And I think there's always something, really kind of interesting and wonderful about the sort of like heavenly landscape before us, essentially up in the heavenlies. And there's something so interesting about galaxies and stars and this far-reaching part of the universe that we're just never going to be able to get to, as much as we strive to. We can barely make it beyond just our own solar system. And so we started to imagine, what this travel to this otherworldly dimension could look like, and sort of integrated what we can see and perceive with tools and images and stuff of NASA, images of galaxies and wonderful, images above us, but also the landscape that we have here on Earth. So we sort of merged those two to create sort of a sense of wonder in the film.
I thought the visuals you did a good job. I thought they were beautiful. I mean, they very much conveyed the feeling and worked along with it. So yeah,
awesome.
Good job. I mean, I agree. I hadn't thought of it, what you said, but that makes so much sense here. How do you come up with visuals for something that doesn't have words? So I guess we're all just making do as humans with conveying this absolutely inexplicable thing we're material beings, or we're living now as material beings. How do you explain another dimension of consciousness? I mean, you can't, because words also are part of this dimension, really.
Yeah.
So
totally.
I think one thing we should dive into, because you do touch upon it, and it's something I think is often avoided in these conversations because it's not the easy part of it. Negative NDEs, scary and dark NDEs. And you did touch upon that in your film, which is reported, I believe, a very small percent of the time. I forget what percent of NDEs are described as frightening. I think it's like 2%, some very little amount. But what are your thoughts on negative NDEs?
Yeah, so personally, as a filmmaker, well, besides being a film, personally, I honestly didn't want to include those stories. And the reason is because personally, it is very difficult. It's like, why do they happen? I would like that to not be, happen to anyone. And so, but what we were finding was, as we're starting to interview more and more people, and then look into the science and the sort of like the discovery of these collections of data points all around the world, that was something that was coming up. And so, as it was coming up, kind of similarly to so in the film, we John Burke describes, because there was one study done, I think it was like 3,000 or 4,000 reported near-death experiences that were all verified. And of that study, which was from a little while ago, it was 23% of that study had come forward and describing what they would say is a distressing or hellish near-death experience. And after meeting a few people who've had them, I mean, they were very kind of reluctant in telling their story. Similarly to people who've had heavenly experiences, in that, I would say across the board, a lot of people are reluctant to come forward and describe their near-death experience, because I think often people are worried that they're not going to be believed. I'm talking about, having a skeptical perspective in the making of the film. And I would say a lot of people are skeptical and don't believe, these near-death experiences. And so in their personal journeys, both heavenly and hellish experiences, when they come forward and talk about it, generally speaking, they're usually met with resistance and disbelief, even among their friends, family, in their community. And so what we were finding was people were generally reluctant, even if they had a heavenly experience, much more so if they've had a hellish experience. And I think the reason is, it's like, why would you want to come forward and talk about that? Like, there's literally nothing to gain, in terms of, if people worry that people are making it up, like having a heavenly experience for some reason to gain. I mean, there's nothing to gain from talking about a hellish experience. It's usually kind of wrapped up in shame or trauma. And so, yeah, it's really difficult for people to kind of talk about and come forward. It did take a while as well, just to kind of like to talk to the people and just kind of gain their trust. John Burke had done a lot of that already with some individuals who he kind of like helped bring along to us, because he had spent the time and earned their trust. And then because he trusted us, kind of like making that connection and feeling like they was going to be put in good hands and that we're not going to do their story injustice. But yeah, it's like it's something that does happen. So as a film, I felt like if we're going to ask the question, what happens after we die, and we're making this film called After Death, then it would be dishonest for me to not include hellish experiences, because they are experiences that people are having. And I, I mean, I think the reason why it's usually not talked about is because it's just difficult to talk about, and it's probably very not popular. I don't. There's a couple of books out there on distressing near death experiences only, and I would say there's no way they're New York Times bestsellers, right?
Right,
Um,
right. I haven't read them yet. I have them on my list. Early in my grief, I would read them and hear about their existence and be
yeah.
terrified.
Well, especially in grief too. It's like, and then for me, the same thing. It's like, why don't it's like I'm uncomfortable with the idea that there even like if there's a hell that it exists. Like I'm uncomfortable with that, right? Like it doesn't create a comfortable feeling. So anyway, that's kind of, but it was just kind of the reason to include it was because it does happen. And
Well,
I actually felt that after meeting a lot of these people that they're really, it's usually hidden because it's unpopular, it's difficult, and I feel bad honestly for the people who've had it's just distressing near the experiences, because usually no one talks to them, and probably don't believe their stories. In fact, I'm in a lot of near death experience Facebook groups, and I actually quite often see people come forward and will say, "Hey, I had this experience, and I'm not seeing it here, but this is what I experienced." And then people will just be like, you're making it up. It's just your fear. That wasn't a near death experience. What you had was actually just psychosis. It was your brain malfunctioning. And yet they're not saying that about a heavenly experience. If it's a heavenly experience, it's like, well, no, your brain was totally dead. You were, it was totally 100% as near death experience. We believe you. And so I do feel bad for the people who've had distressing experiences, because there's sort of this, disbelief.
and what do you think, though, it says about the other side? I mean, like what maybe a religious person would use the word hell, or, a dimension of negativity. Do you see it as if people are going to be stuck in a permanent or very long-term negative situation? And I mean, it seems the people who've had, negative near-death experiences, they seem like just normal, good people. They're not murderers. They haven't hurt people. So,
Yeah.
do you see it as permanent or just a bad step, the way life has ups and downs in this dimension?
Well, I mean, some of that's a bit of a philosophical question, but if I just kind of like limit it to just these people's experiences and their stories, people have had distressing experiences. The ones that we interviewed, there's a few that we interviewed that we didn't include in the film, just for the sake of time and stories. We have 14 people in the film. I think we focus on four stories, and it's there's only so much time we can give to really get to know them, right? That's the very difficult decisions that we have to make as filmmakers, to how much time and who we include. But in the process of creating it, meeting so many different people who've had these experiences, and I would say all the people who've had both the heavenly experience and the hellish experience, they all would describe. Well, not all of them would say the word eternity, but they would use a word like that same meaning, which was like that they are now in a different dimension, and this is what it is. So I didn't hear from anyone that's when they had a hellish experience that said that they knew that this was temporary. In fact, everyone that I talked to said they knew this was, I don't even know if they use the words permanent, but this was eternal. They stepped into eternity. And actually, both in the heavenly experiences and the hellish ones, what I found was, and I should say specifically the people who've clinically died, who had these near-death experiences, because sometimes near-death experiences can occur not when someone's died, like someone's falling. There's certain things that can happen in life that kind of seem to create near-death experiences, but we just kind of focus on clinical death. Those ones would say that when they stepped into sort of like this other dimension, this afterlife experience, they didn't have agency anymore. And that was just this very common sort of like everyone was kind of saying the same thing over and over and over. And it didn't seem to matter background or like where they came from in the world, because we interviewed people in Iran, we interviewed people in Israel, we interviewed several people in India, And then we have a gentleman from South Korea who was in the film that later had immigrated to the US. And, very different sort of cultural backgrounds and sort of like preconceived notions of what the afterlife would be. Steve Kang, who we include in the film, who had a hellish experience initially, he says his upbringing of the afterlife is that there is sort of like a hellish realm or darker lower realms, and there's a higher dimension, multiple level, like higher realms. And basically when you die, you can kind of move between these based off of works, and like you can just like learn and do, and it's sort of like this university or whatever in this other dimension essentially, and that you can move and progress through it. And he said that when he had stepped into death, it was just this immediate knowing, like no one told him with a voice, but just this immediate knowing within him that this is it. And that there was just like whatever he did or said was not going to change matters. So the exception being that we found that there was several people who, when they had these experiences, when they did call out for help, that they were helped and they were brought up out of it. So Steve Kang didn't have a rescue, so to speak, where, there was like this being of light that came down and pulled him out, but he woke up in the hospital room and they were able to get his body stabilized. And just before he woke up, he heard this voice, and this voice spoke to him and said, "I love you, Steve. No more drugs." And yeah, and then when he woke up, there was these people that were around him that said they all felt they were supposed to come to the hospital that day. And they said they just all knew, they didn't know each other, and they all knew there was going to be someone that needed prayer. And so they were all there, and they were like, "Does anyone need help or prayer?" And they're like, "Well, there's this guy over here that, is kind of touch and go, and he may slip into a coma." And when he woke up, these guys are around, and that was sort of his first interaction after coming back. So there was that story, and then Howard Storm, who we kind of heavily feature in the film because there's something so interesting about his redemption arc. He had this very, terrible, hellish experience, but in that he had this memory of himself when he's a small child. And I think he said it was like one or the only 2 or 3 times that he was ever brought to like a church, and it was like a Sunday school. I think he said he was 5 or 6 years old. And he talks about, he remembers like reciting this simple prayer. And it was like, when he says he saw himself as a child, and he just thought to himself, "Oh, I believed in God then, and it was so simple. It was just like, oh yeah, like I know there's a God that loves me and like is going to watch out for me." And it was so simple. And he was just like, and now he's lived, decades as an atheist, and he was, a very hardened atheist, ardent atheist, and like fully held on to that belief when he was going into death. And he was just like, how did I get so far from that? And after that memory was basically like finished, and he had that thought, he heard this voice that told him to pray. And this is, decades into being atheist, he doesn't pray. He doesn't know what the heck that is. Has no idea. Right. So I think he said like, he was like, "God save America." Or he said some certain words that was like, whatever comes to mind. And and I think he was like, I don't know, I'm from Canada, so it's, forgive my ignorance on, there's certain American. So he had a few words that he was trying to bring up just from memory, and he was like, I don't know what to pray, and so he's told, like pray. The third time after he's told to pray, he just said he basically called out to God to save him out of that place. And when he called out, right at that moment, he says he saw like this pinprick of light in this otherworldly sort of void dimension that was darker than dark, like blacker, the inverse of light is what he described. And it was this pinprick of light, and all of a sudden it just gets like huge fast. And all of a sudden there was this man made of light standing before him. And it's like basically the equivalent of 1,000 burning suns in terms of brightness. And this man like just loves on him, picks him up and holds him. And he says, as he embraced him, physically he was being restored, like he was being healed all over. He says he had a physical form, even though it was a spiritual body, but it was like this physical, spiritual kind of other dimension body, which he could still feel. And he felt all of the healing take place. And then he says the healing went and penetrated deep within and went down to his soul level and completely transformed and healed his soul. And then he's basically being brought up And then he's told it's not his time, and he has this mission, and he's sent back. Making a long story short, but there was something so powerful in that he had this hellish experience. There was this call for help that it was met, which isn't really like, that's not something that's talked about within like the Christian faith. The Christian faith, what I was raised to believe is that, it's like we make our decisions here on earth, and whatever your decisions are, whether you believe in God or not, if you accepted God or not, is like basically you go to hell if you hadn't, and you go to heaven if you had, and that's it.
That seems
So
like
this,
such a cruel belief, I mean, yeah.
yeah, well,
And
yeah, and so
was it scary at all, or
the like being in that
like
faith,
your
or
belief? Yeah, believing in hell like that.
honestly, I just never really thought about hell.
Mhm.
No, like day to day, just didn't think about hell. And it was these hellish experiences that are sort of like the first time, kind of like, oh my goodness, like what, like this stuff is actually real. I just, it was hard. It was really difficult, but there was something so interesting about when these people had all called out for help, that they were met with that. And that was a kind of a commonality too, was with a lot of these people's experiences. Now, Steve, again, is the exception, that he didn't call out and wasn't helped in that moment, but he woke up in the room, and he was so happy to be alive, so happy. Like he's like given a second chance at life, and he lives his life so differently now. He's just like only thinks of others. It's all about like, I mean, he became a Christian. Actually, he was he was raised a Buddhist, and he actually became a Christian basically after the people who had met him on the bedside, who, like I said, who all felt to go to the hospital that day, kind of coincidentally, and were there when he woke up, and was just like, hey, like, do you want to know more about God? And he was like, yeah, it'd be great.
And it's interesting. Did you have anyone who had the opposite perspective? Because I've heard people who have NDs believed in organized religion and God and Christianity, and they came out of it saying, well, I don't believe in God. I don't believe in religion anymore. I now believe in like a higher, like a something. Again, there aren't words for it, but that their
Yeah.
definition of religion was completely
Yeah.
wrong too.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. Like, so Dr. Jeffrey Long's accounts of over 4,000, it's quite a few people. I think in his questionnaire, he goes into kind of like, what do they believe before, or what do they believe now? There's actually quite a few of atheists that are not atheists anymore. I don't know of any data sets that were former atheists still atheists when he had done the survey. But yeah, certainly it's not that everyone ends up like, let's say, being a Christian. And I think a lot of that has to do with people are contextualizing now what they experienced, and now trying to integrate it into the life that they live. So depending on where they are in the world, it could mean different things. And many people are taking what they experience and they're interpreting it a certain way. And so, like, for example, some people will be like, well, they live in say a Hindu family, and what they experience doesn't really all jive with what their faith was. But if they bring all that up, it's going to create conflict with their family, and family is really important. And so culture and family, we're going to keep that together. And so they're just going to integrate that with their sort of like lived belief system with their family. So there is that. I think interpretation is a big one. So John Burke in the book Imagine Heaven here, he kind of makes a case in this book that from a Christian perspective, so John ended up becoming a believer, a Christian from near-death experiences, but not immediately. So he went through this whole long process of, he's very analytical, similar to Dale Black, of an engineer background. He actually was an engineer, and then his dad was dying of cancer, and that's kind of what made him like interested in near-death experiences. We didn't get into this part in the film because it was just so much to get into, but in his story, he goes through, he said he basically kind of read all of the world's religious texts, anything he can get his hands on in terms of ancient, particularly ancient religions text. And what he was looking for was, here we have Dr. Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, all of these accounts of near-death experiences, which do have these similarities. And he was kind of writing down, like, what are those similarities? And then he was looking for those descriptions in these other world's religions texts. And he said he found that a lot of them would have like 5 or 6 out of what he found was he said it was 40 common descriptors of near-death experiences. or of the afterlife. And he says when he read through the Hebrew Bible for the first time, he says that there was 38 out of the 40 common descriptors were found throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. And so then he went back and read them all again, and just to kind of revet it or whatever. And then he said, he was like, okay, he became convinced just based off data sets that I'm only finding 4 or 5, sometimes upwards of 6, but 6 was the max out of 40 common descriptors of the afterlife, based off of like the religious texts are saying this is what it will be. So it's like they're outlining what that is going to be, and then what people describe. And in the Hebrew Bible, it's 38 out of 40. He was like, that's close enough for me. He's like, he became a Christian after that, because he's just like, this seems to be the only one that gets the closest. And yeah, so there is sort of like, there's different paths that people are on in their sort of spiritual journey, but this is how these people ended up.
Right. Yeah. And it's, as we said, it's really hard, I'm sure, to explain, and you do the best you can, and you find communities that I would imagine where you're like, okay, that sort of relates to what I went through.
Totally.
It's fascinating. Yeah. Now, if you had a chance to have an NDE, would you?
Before making the film, probably when I read the books, I would say yes. Because it just was like, wow, what it would be amazing to just experience for a moment heaven. Be amazing experience just to say hi to my brother-in-law again. Just, all of these, I think there's so many incredible things about what these people are describing. And even all the other things like we talked about earlier, like other colors and like, a different set of vision, all this kind of stuff would be so amazing. I would say after meeting these people and making the film, probably not. And the reason is it's actually really difficult, I think, for people to integrate, after what they experienced, which in some cases was like basically eternal bliss. They're in what they would describe as home. They're in this place that we're all sort of created to, where we're created to be. And there's no pain, there's no death, there's no loss, there's only joy, there's only love, there's only light. So here on earth, we experience both sides. We experience the good and the bad, the dark and the light. And there in heaven, at least, it's like it's only light. There's no darkness at all. It's only one thing. And it sounds amazing, but it would be so difficult to experience that and then come back to here where there is both, and there is injustice. We don't have perfect justice here on earth. I didn't have it with the loss of my brother-in-law, the person that killed him. And there's a lot of people that see injustice. I mean, there's kids that get cancer and die. It's like, there's a lot of injustice here on earth, and a lot of questions that I don't think will ever be fully answered while we're here. But experiencing like perfection and then coming back to something that's broken, it would be really difficult, I think. So after seeing kind of like years of them trying to figure that out, and how painful that experience is, I don't know. I'm just like, maybe it's good to wait.
Yeah. Well, I actually want to ask you, when you said you perceive it as perfection there, but then we were also talking about hellish NDEs. So you think those are two separate dimensions, and it's not like all intertwined, horrible, good, the way it is here. It's like you go to the hellish and you fight to get out of it into the, joyful, loving, Okay.
Yeah. It seems like, I mean, again, this is just kind of like after the books and the people and the research. It seems like the best way I can kind of make sense of it is like these people are all getting a little tiny glimpse of the afterlife. Just here. They're all just getting some small little taste, little spectrum, even though it's so huge and overwhelming and they don't have words for it. None of them are getting the full picture. Like nobody's getting the full picture because there's so many different stories and experiences, and there are overlapping elements for sure. So like, the things like meeting dead relatives and a life review and all this kind of stuff. But it seems like they're all getting little glimpses, and there are places that are sort of this in between. And there's sort of like some people only step outside their body and they see their body. They didn't see otherworldly dimensions, and then they re-enter their body, right? Or maybe you hear a voice, it's not your time, and then they go back. So not everyone has this same or all-encompassing vision. I think there's a great mystery for what comes after, and I think nobody is really going to be able to fully comprehend what that is and how that all works. I mean, for me personally, in my faith, that's kind of the best way I've kind of made sense of it is from a Christian perspective. I think, in the Bible, there's a case for these two sort of realities of dimensions, of lower dimension being hell, the upper dimension being heaven. And even within heaven, there's multiple dimensions. The Bible talks about 3 levels of heaven, the third being where the throne room is, where God is. And that there's sort of this in between those two places, there's sort of this void or sort of pathway in between. And so that, to me, it seems like a lot of these people, the best way I can make sense of it for myself is that a lot of these people are getting little glimpses of both this higher dimension of heaven, lower dimension of hell, and in between. And it's just kind of like reaffirming that, yeah, there is something after. And I think it's up to us individually to kind of like go on that journey of, discovery in terms of if there's a faith, kind of seeing what makes sense, what is true, and kind of go on that journey here.
Yeah, and find what ways. Yeah, because I actually, interestingly, still consider myself an atheist, but I think science and evidence is showing that the core of our consciousness is non-local. So I'm like, I mean, maybe it's not to some as good as a religion for themselves, but it's certainly better than thinking consciousness was created by a brain and when we're done, we're done. So,
yeah,
I guess no matter, yeah. So, yeah. And you still consider yourself a Christian. It's interesting, when you keep some, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It's just, for me, it made the most sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just there's anyway, everyone can kind of go on their own journey and see where that ends up. But if anyone is like, interested in learning, how on earth could that be? Because I would say from the outside perspective, people that are outside of like the Christian faith and outside of the church who don't have that kind of background, and I have a lot of friends that have never grown up in that way, have kind of, from their perspective, has shared with me, oh, like you made a film because you're a Christian and you're just like trying to show that trying to validate your faith, whatever. And then I'm like, actually, if you're on the inside, most Christians don't talk about near-death experiences. Most Christians and most churches, like, this is like not safe territory. Like, don't go there, don't talk about it. A lot of people are just like, no, it's all made up. Like, these people are crazy and it's not true. So within the Christian faith is typically not talked about. John Burke, like I mentioned in his book, if everyone's like interested in like sort of a deep dive on what that is and how that could possibly line up, he has this book called Imagine Heaven, and he does a better job than I ever could of like making a case for how that could line up. And certainly it's not hitting anyone over the head. It's very similar to After Death in terms of you go on this discovery and you kind of see where you end up at the end, and just kind of holding it open-handedly. But
yeah, and I think like it's kind of no wrong or right conclusion. Some people really want other people. They're like, oh, you can't think this, you can't think that. It's like, be a Christian, be a religious Jew, be an atheist, be, as long as you're not hurting him. It's such a big mystery, and it's so interesting to find like the pockets or different definitions, or I mean, it's probably a lifelong I was about to say it's a lifelong exploration, but I don't think anyone's going to have any answers. I would even speculate that on the other side, you were talking about the different layers and dimensions. I would think the same. There's probably multiple dimensions. And even when you pass onto the other side, you probably just get a tiny portion of the answers. I doubt you get the whole picture, so exploration will continue.
Right.
What are your thoughts? Have you explored any of the other afterlife evidence, like past reincarnation or anything? Yeah, I guess, I mean, there's so much reincarnation, out of body experiences. I guess that ties into near death experiences. So yeah, I guess I'll ask about reincarnation. What are your thoughts on that? Did you learn anything about that in this?
I haven't really done like a deep dive into any of that. Certainly, I've learned about some cases just as it comes up with near-death experience research and all that. There's definitely like a lot of information out there on all those different kind of like topics. I just kind of narrowly focused on near-death experiences because, in the creation of the film After Death, but also personally for me, it was enough to kind of be convinced, I guess, that there is something after, and just at the point of like clinical death. Because like I said, there's there are a lot of near-death experiences that occur outside of clinical death. It could be a close brush with death. It could be you felt like maybe you were going to die. All these kinds of things could lead up to someone having a near-death experience. And I don't really know and understand how all that works, but there's something interesting about all that. But I just kind of narrowly focused on all my learnings and research on just strictly kind of like people clinically dying and having the experience.
How has your grief and you as a person changed since making this film and learning all of this?
So it's really helped me just in my question of, like what happens after death, as well as, where is my brother-in-law now? I feel very strongly that that he is in heaven, and that one day that I get to be reunited with him, and I long for that. I'm it gives me hope. It gives me something to kind of look forward to outside, like after death. And so yeah, it's profoundly kind of impacted my life. And like I think I said near the beginning of the call, some of the first stories that I came across, and the first few people that I met who've had this near-death experience, I kind of got to vicariously live through what they described. Like the moments after the crash, the moments after drowning, all these different kind of experiences. The things that they describe, I just couldn't help but wonder, is that what my brother-in-law experienced?
And have you tried to communicate with him at all, either yourself mentally with mediumship or asking for signs?
Yeah, early in the grief process, yeah, my wife and I, we we were just begging God for any kind of sign, and like, where is he, and just making sure he's okay. And yeah, we actually both independently had received, like, we got these dreams that honestly felt like they really stuck with us. Like all these years later, we can both talk about them as if they just happened the other day. They just felt so real. One where my brother-in-law picked me up and gave me a hug, and told me everything's gonna be okay. And we've also had signs in our home. There was one sign that happened in particular when it was a really dark night where we both were just really down, like really depressed, and we weren't even sure if we wanted to kind of continue living. And that's when we had this sign that came out and just kind of let us know, no, it's going to be okay. And Mark was fine. And yeah, that was really helpful for us. And I feel like those are just gifts. I've heard of so many stories of people in similar situations, who talk about the same kind of thing. It's like during that really heavy time of grief and going through sort of like the dark night of the soul, asking these questions and being given signs, and it's just helpful.
For me, it was absolutely life transforming. And I think we all go to that really dark place in grief. And I got some strong signs in those darkest days too. Would you want to share a memory of your brother-in-law? You don't have to do that. That's completely optional. If that's too emotional, if you would like to, I'd love to give you the chance.
Sure. Yeah. Like, so Marco is my brother-in-law. He was, like the best person I could ever meet. Like, I've met so many different people, and I've never met anyone so selfless as he was. And funny, like, he's the kind of guy that can enter the room and just make anyone laugh, anyone feel comfortable. That was sort of his mission in life, was to just make people laugh and make them feel comfortable. But countless times he would give the shirt off his back to anyone in need around him. He only ever thought of other people. He just never thought of himself. And I mean, that's just like the day-to-day memory that I hold of Marco, and I'll never forget.
Thank you so much for sharing that. He sounds wonderful. And yeah, I will say, from my intense study of the evidence, and yours sounds like you will definitely be around him again. So where can everyone see the film and follow you and stay in touch?
So the film is called After Death, and it went out to theaters, 2,700 theaters across North America back in October, and now it's available for on demand. So if people want to rent it or buy it, it's available on Apple TV, Amazon Prime, as well as Google Play. So on YouTube, if you watch YouTube movies, you can rent or purchase it there. Eventually, it'll be out for streaming, but right now, that's where it's available. And we also have a a DVD and a Blu-ray. So if you go to afterdeathmovie.com, we have a DVD and Blu-ray there. And I would say the value to the Blu-ray in particular is that we have a bunch of additional scenes that were not included in the film. We have a roundtable discussion that's over an hour, talking about grief, talking about some more deeper kind of discussions around near-death experiences, heaven, hell, all of that with Mary Neal, Don Piper, a few of the people that we included in the film. And we also have a whole making of. We have a 1 hour making of. If you want to know how to make a documentary, which is a crazy journey, you can see how this was kind of conceptualized all the way through to the final result.
Hey everyone! I'm really excited to let you know about the Science and Spirituality salons I'm now hosting. During these intimate events, a scientifically verified psychic medium will give all of you readings, and I will give a talk on the science and evidence that changed my mind about an afterlife. This will also be an amazing opportunity to get to meet some of you in person or virtually, and to share more about all the science and data that transformed my worldview and got me through my worst days. These can be hosted in your home, in a nearby cafe with a private room, or they can even be virtual. I've hosted a few already, and they were really special, fascinating, emotional, evidential. So if you're interested in getting a small group together over dinner, brunch, drinks, coffee, to learn more about the science and to get evidential medium readings, send me an email at hello@wtfjusthappened.net and put science and spirituality in the title. To get more information on what the fuck just happened, go to wtfjusthappened.net. There, you can order my book, WTF Just Happened, A Sciencey Skeptic Explores Grief, Healing, and Evidence of an Afterlife. You can learn all about how I came to conclude that there most likely is an afterlife, but you can also learn about the early stages of my grief and the amazing, fascinating people I met along the way. You can read about how much I harassed the mediums and scientists trying to get evidence to see if the mediums were cheating and see if what everyone was saying actually was true. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to stay updated on any new developments and any interesting new what the fuck updates. So if you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. It makes such a difference, especially for a new podcast like this one. And if any of you have had a crazy what the fuck yourself, have any questions, feedback, or just want to say hey, reach out on either Instagram at WTF_just_happened_, or email me at hello@wtfjusthappened.net. I love hearing from all of you. It makes my day hearing your stories and questions and feedback and all of it. And remember, you don't have to draw any final conclusions as you wonder, what the fuck just happened?